Okay, we're going to do this segment on how to set up the linkage on a six-pack Mopar six-pack setup. It's also the same procedure on a Corvette tri-power. This is your link rod. You know, connects the front and rear carburetor. These hands here, sometimes you'll get these and this bushing in here is a separate piece and you got to put them together. You just got to make sure that the hands go the same way so this makes a straight line. You know, this one ain't sitting on this side or whatever. This part of the linkage is a bushing that's like machined into, you know, this washer, and they've got it, you know, crimped here for the pivot. So the way this works is this fits in this shaft, this slot on your center carburetor shaft, and you know, when the throttle goes back, that'll allow the secondaries to open. So basically the way you assemble this is you got like this button pin. Let's see if we can get in there. That goes on the inside first, like so. And these rods, there's a long and a short one. The short one goes towards the back because the distance is closer. And you would just put the bushing, goes into the slot, like so. There's a washer that goes on. Washer goes on there. My mitts out of the way. And then there's just a cotter pin that goes in. You know, you just, you know, bend it over and we'll give it a little bit of a bend so it's not falling out on me. That's fine. Okay, so we got the long rod towards the front, the short one. I've got this plate set up. It would be like substituting for the manifold. So when you're first installing the carburetors, what you want to do is you want to mount all the carburetors starting from the rear, because the bowl's going to interfere because they got to kind of come in that way. Once you get them all installed and you tighten down the plate, you're going to want to check to make sure that there's no binding. I went over that earlier in the video. You want to make sure that this shaft, there's no binding in it. Now, if you have the carburetors hooked up, it'll be up against the vacuum pod and you're going to feel a little resistance. But when you let it go down, that vacuum pod should have enough pressure to close that. The little spring, if it's working right. And you check both of them. If you've got any binding and that little spring won't close them, you've got issues either, when I talked about the other video, either the manifold's warped, the bases are warped, and they've warped the shaft. That has to be addressed. I mean, if these things are binding on you, just stop and, you know, quit the procedure, because you're just going to have problems. So anyway, say all this works out fine. What you want to do, you got all the carburetors installed. What you want to do is keep these rods disconnected, and you can take a rubber band or whatever and run it around the shaft to here, just to make sure that these things are closed. They should stay closed enough with the spring pressure off of the vacuum pod. But just to double check, you know, I'll throw a rubber band around here, up around that stud on both of them. So now we know the outboards are closed. So what we want to do is we want to adjust our, you know, let everything warm up, you know, our choke, fast idle, everything's warmed up, choke's off. We want to get back to our idle speed. And this is your idle adjustment screw. If you're using the the solenoid, the anti-diesel solenoid, your adjustment would be on that nut when it's energized. And that would adjust the idle here, and your hard stop would be backed off a little. So what the anti-diesel solenoid does is it when you shut the engine off, it lets the throttle blades close all the way and keeps it from running on. That's what that is on there for. You don't run into that a lot, you know, if you got good fuel and it's not like down here in the desert 110 degrees. But so anyways, we're just going to talk about your idle adjustment here. And I've showed you in other videos the way I initially set up the idle adjustment. Is the throttle is closed, and I open the adjusting screw until I make a square on that transition slot, and that's really pretty close to where the idle is going to be. But you've got the car started up, it's warmed up, you're just working on this center carburetor. These are closed. And you also want to make sure that you disconnect your vacuum line on the other side from the center carburetor, because you don't want to be revving this engine and then accidentally start pulling the ported vacuum to those outboard carburetors. So you want to make sure you disconnect the vacuum pods on this side from the center carburetor. So we've got that. Car's running. You're setting your idle, using your air fuels and stuff to get the idle you need, you know. And you know, you can work the throttle and goose it, clear it out, whatever you need to do. Okay, so say you've got it running, you've got it tuned, you know, best idle you want. So now you're going to start working on hooking up the linkages to the outboard carburetors. So engine's off, get rid of your rubber band or whatever. You want to make sure the throttle shafts are closed, and what's happening is this thing off again. This bushing is going to be bottomed out in this slot. You want it bottomed out in the slot all the way down. So my center carburetors, it's on its idle adjustment. I'm making sure that my bushing is all the way bottomed in the slot. And now what I'm going to do is make sure this is closed, and I'm going to adjust this screw to where I'm all the way down the bottom of my slot, just goes in. You don't want like a lot of movement here. See, that's just got a very little bit of movement. Now you're going to do the same thing with the rear carburetor. You're going to make sure it's closed. This one I already had adjusted. So what you got here is you can work these things like this, and you just barely want any kind of play there, because you want this link rod to close these butterflies. You don't want to depend on the little vacuum pod springs to keep these outboards closed. So now once you have that adjustment, the carburetor's adjustment, then you'll go and you'll put your little clip locks on, and they're specific per front and rear. The offset's different. You can figure that out in a hurry. Got the back one on. The front. And clip it on. Okay. it's on. I'm down on my idle stop. Throttle blades are closed. You know, they can't open. Plus, you know, also you've got your return spring on this. They can't open. You don't want slop here. We'll make sure that these blades are closed. Now, anytime you're making an idle adjustment on the center carburetor, you need to disconnect these link rods. Because right now, if you were to try to lower the idle and start backing the screw out, the throttle's not going to go down because it's locked up on this long shaft. You could raise the idle, but now you're not going to be at the bottom of the slot. So, get into a problem, you want to readjust your idle, and you need to use that screw, or you need to use your solenoid, disconnect these rods, and again, disconnect those vacuum pods so you don't accidentally start revving this and pull vacuum, because these things will go wide open if this link rod is not on here and you've got that vacuum source, and you can't shut them off unless you manually grab them. So the way the system works is you got the little spring holding this down, because if you don't, it'll drag it a little, because this is heavy and these shafts are really free moving. So you know, on the car with the vacuum pot on her, it's going to hold it closed. Now you see the center carburetor will just roll right along that slot and bushing. And what this is doing is this allows the outboards to operate, and it also closes them. So when you get to a certain point on the throttle, that slot's going to get longer. You know, the slot down here, you can see it's moving away from the bushing off of the bottom. So let's say we just go to wide open throttle. Now, these secondaries will start coming in as it's pulling the air, you know, through its ported vacuum, and they're going to start opening, you know, and they're going to open together because they're tied together. And see right here, that's as far as they'll go open, because I'm only about, I don't know, 2/3 throttle. As I keep going, they'll keep opening, and once I hit full throttle on this, these will go all the way up to full throttle. And you want to make sure they go full throttle. You know, your adjustments here for the outboards, you know, you're going to be at full throttle, and you still got a little clearance on that slot down there. So that's your full throttle. So you're wanking along, you got full vacuum to the pods that pulled these up. Now, when you get off the throttle, if you watch, it's going to close these outboards. See? It pushed them closed. Because unless you can push them closed, that vacuum pod's going to keep them open, running wide open. So, you know, that's basically the adjustment. That's all you need to do on these. You know, your primary concern is these throttles are closed at an idle. Closed at an idle. If they're not closed at an idle, you're going to get funky idle adjustment situation. Especially, you can usually tell when something's out of whack. Is like you ran it, you did a couple pulls, the outboards are kicking in, and you come up back to idle, and the engine's idling real high. That means that these things are open for some reason. The rod's misadjusted, you've got something sticking, or you know, things of that nature. This is our A and B setup. If you just follow what I said you do on it, and I just say, you know, be cautious about those outboard carburetors. When they're not captured with this link rod, you make sure you disconnect the vacuum source from the center carburetor, you know, the ported vacuum source, before you start monkeying around with them. And because I say, when you start revving this up and there's no link rod holding these, and you get enough air to start working that Venturi port that controls those, because this is like, we're going wide open throttle, vacuum pods come in, pull it open, and then the throttle arm and linkage are going to close those outboards, just like that, you know, it's closing them. And the little spring here, you know, if these throttle shafts are nice and free like they're supposed to, that spring will just give you enough pressure. If there's just any little bit of slop here, you can it'll take that up. So the next video I'm going to go in is when I have the carburetors assembled. We're going to go into how the vacuum pods are going to work on this setup, and I'm going to actually function test them and show you where they get the vacuum from, how the system works, and we'll go from there.